Hello and welcome to Choose a Fi. Today on the show, we have a really interesting episode. So we had Dr. Bobby Dubois on the show in episode 498, where we talked about his 6 pillars of health. And this was a really exceedingly well-received episode. I thought it was fantastic. And you obviously know that I think Fi and the financial aspects of Fi, it's just an umbrella to give you space to think about life, to focus on what really matters. And I think your health is really one of those lead pillars. And that's why having somebody like Dr. Bobby, who is a Harvard grad with a medical degree from Johns Hopkins, a PhD in health policy, 180 plus academic peer reviewed publications, and he's a physician scientist who focuses on what actually works for his patients. He called in our first episode sleep the unsung hero of health. And that just popped off the page to me. And I said, we have to follow up with an episode on sleep. And that's what this episode is today. This is really a masterclass on why sleep is important, but more importantly, what you can do in your own life to make your sleep better. I think this is a really essential episode, and I'm so glad that we recorded this one. I think you're really going to enjoy this. And with that, welcome to Choose a Fi. Dr. Bobby, it is so good to have you back. Thanks for being here.
Oh, wonderful to be back. Thanks so much.
So it's been about a year. And the cool thing about the podcasting world is I listen to your podcast every single week. Podcast is Live Long and Well with Dr. Bobby. And this is the single podcast that I tell people, if they're interested in health, this is the one you need to download. And Bobby, you know this. I've told you this offline and online now twice. I love your show. I genuinely love it. I think you're doing a great service to the world. And I just want to scream from the rooftops, everyone download this podcast, Live Long and Well with Dr. Bobby. It's genuinely great. Obviously, I'm a layperson. I'm just an idiot off the street, but I've been studying health, in my own way for the last decade or more. And this is the most succinct way I've seen someone who actually knows what they're talking about summarize and curate information. And again, Bobby, I think it's a wonderful service. So thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I like the word curate because unlike a lot of people who talk, they kind of have a dog in this race. I'm not like an anti-sugar person or a pro-sugar person or an anti-this or a pro-this. I'm an evidence-based medicine physician scientist. And so for me, I'm just fascinated to say, well, people say you should drink 8 glasses of water a day. Where's the science on this? Where's the evidence? Do people do better or worse if they drink that much water? And that's my excitement. And then, of course, I have to boil it down to 30 minutes or less and not overwhelm people because I am a nerd. But it's been a lot of fun. And thank you so much for sharing that with folks.
Yeah, you bet. And you were last on, like I said, about a year ago in episode 498. And we went through your 6 pillars. And we spent a significant amount of time on the pillar we're going to talk about today. But we really want to dive into it. So this is sleep, which to me is really the lead domino for health. It's the way that I look at the world. I was actually just having a chat with my friend Erin yesterday, and both of us kind of have issues off and on with sleep, even though we've both tried to really hone in on maybe a lot of the things we're talking about today. Sleep in a cold room, sleep in a dark room, a lot of the don't eat before bed. And Bobby, I don't want to steal your thunder, obviously, but we're trying. And yet, even still, again, in this conversation, we were saying what dictates whether we have a good day a lot of times is, did we get a good night of sleep the night before? And that to me just screams like this is an absolutely fundamental pillar of health. And this is why I wanted you back on to really dive into these 12 do's and don'ts, and maybe then some other things you picked up along the way. So again, I really appreciate you being here. Why don't we start, I guess, with the do's? Is that your better starting point, or do you think there's something more holistic to start with?
Well, I think there's 2 steps backwards we can take. One, of course, we got to put sleep into perspective, why it matters. And it isn't just, well, I feel better the next day. But I think even taking a further step back on why do we care about health? This is a financial podcast. We're trying to get people as confidently as possible to fiscal independence. Why are we talking about this? So for me, health is one of the 3 critical legs of a stool. If anyone's ever sat on a three-legged stool, if you take one away, you fall. And the first two are obvious, which is we want to get to a point where financially we can handle retirement and not worry too much day to day, especially in today's environment. That's an important thing. Secondly, we got to have a reason to wake up in the morning. Got to have a purpose, a reason, a set of activities. So that's also critical. Without that, you might have money, but you're not going to be happy. And the third is you may have the money, you may have the purpose, but you don't have the health or the energy to enjoy your retirement. Now you've done all this work, all this saving, all this focus, and you feel miserable and you don't have your energy, and maybe you die younger than you thought you would. So I think it's critically important. The other thing is that in the FI world, the sooner you start saving money, the better off you're going to be. And the sooner you start, the sooner you might be able to retire. And you want to get money in your investment accounts. I'm not going to talk about Roth versus taxable or this, that, and the other, but you want to get money in your accounts. Health is the same way. You can't wake up at age 65, say, now I'm retired. Now I'm going to work on my health, because by then you've lost the investment. Your muscles have deteriorated. You may be overweight. You may have put damage on your heart, all sorts of things. So, your audience tends to be folks in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. You are the prime community to get started. Sleep is just one of the many things to focus on, and it's a great place for us to begin today.
Yeah, I love that. That is the perfect way to set the stage. And yeah, it's important to put this in perspective, right? So it's compounding benefits is what you're talking about.
Absolutely. And we'll get to later one of my key questions that comes to me, which is, okay, I got to bed late last night. I know I'm supposed to get to the gym the next morning. Should I cut my sleep short to get to the gym because exercise is important? Or do I skip the gym and sleep longer? And this is a teaser for your audience. We'll come back to this question later because I think there really is an important answer to it. So maybe I should just begin by sort of reminding people, why is sleep important? Because we can certainly talk and will talk about the ways to improve our sleep, but I think it isn't just a nice to have. About 40, 50 years ago, Americans got about 8 hours of sleep a night. That was typical. I'm not quite sure what all aspects explain it, but now half of Americans get significantly less than 7 hours of sleep. So it's a huge drop. And it turns out from kind of numerous studies, the cut point is 7 to 8 hours is really what we need to aim for. If you're less than 7 hours, bad things happen. Everything from our risk of heart attack goes up by 20%, our risk of obesity goes up by 30%, and our risk of dementia goes up by 30%. And there's lots of references to this. If anyone wants to listen to my podcast on sleep, the show notes have all the references. You can take a look at that. So not only does sleep cause us to feel fairly miserable the next day and more emotional the next day, it also takes a toll, and an important toll. So we really, really, really want to worry about our sleep and try to do something about it. So one of the other things that's very common in the United States is we're all tend to be somewhat overweight. Probably 30, 40% of us are obese. A similar number is overweight. And we're all struggling with how to lose some of those pounds. And there was a really interesting study where they took overweight people who typically didn't get a lot of sleep. So they were kind of below 6.5 hours a night. And they tried a variety of different ways to help people improve sleep. And we're going to talk about many of those later. And what they found was not only could they improve the amount of sleep they got by over an hour more, but those people ate less, about 270 calories fewer each day. As probably everyone knows, if you've been up all night, you're emotionally a little bit more unsteady, and we look for comfort foods, and we tend to eat more. So that's been shown quite a bit. And so if that is one of your areas of focus to try to lose a few pounds and you're not quite getting the sleep you need, you might solve two problems at one time.
Bobby, I'm curious just to take another big step back. You referenced in our last episode Dr. Matthew Walker and his book, Why We Sleep. I'm curious if you could go into your understanding of literally why we sleep. Because I think about from a real evolutionary and natural selection standpoint, the worst thing we could possibly do as animals is basically be comatose for 8 hours a day, where we're completely defenseless and we're just lying there. So clearly, there has to be some massive, significant benefits to sleep, or we would have essentially evolved out of this to a large degree, because it's just, I mean, quite literally, the worst thing you could do is lie there defenseless for a third of a day. So that's kind of how I look at the framework of this is clearly important or would have been gone many, many tens of thousands of years ago. What's actually happening when we sleep? What's going on in the brain and the body? What is the purpose of sleep?
It's a wonderful question. Thanks for asking it. And for folks who are truly interested, Matt Walker's book is excellent. He is someone who has spent his whole life focused on sleep. So if you want all the nuances, he's the one. Yeah, evolutionarily, why did we end up sleeping all day long and a lot of other animals don't? Is an interesting question. It probably has something to do with our cultural advancements, that we tended to live in tribes. So we wouldn't all go to sleep at the same time and allow the lions to come to the salad bar. So, I think over the millennium, way back when, there probably were people that were awake while others were asleep. So that's perhaps why we didn't give up on sleeping all day long, because of the fear of it. But what happens? There's a zillion things that happen, but I'll cite two different things. We all want to make memories. That's what life is ultimately all about. And as we know, if you are around somebody with dementia, they have a very, very hard time learning new information. You give them a phone number to remember, they won't remember it. You ask them about what they did yesterday, they may not remember it, but they will remember things that happened when they were much younger. So near-term memories are housed in a region of the brain called the hippocampus. It's a region of the brain, doesn't really matter where it is. But near-term memories, that's where they reside. And then during sleep, you, in essence, reboot your computer. Your brain is a computer, and those memories get shifted from short-term to long-term. Now, obviously, we don't dissect humans' brains and see what's going on and put electrodes all the time. So a lot of this is somewhat conjecture. And then there's a lot of experiments that have been done. Like they take people and they keep them awake and they teach them something. And then the next morning they haven't slept, but do they remember anything? And as we all know, if you've done an all-nighter, you might remember it the next morning, but you're likely not to remember any of what you quickly learned later. And that's in part because those short-term memories don't become long-term. So there is an absolute critical element that if you don't sleep, you're going to have a hard time learning new things and getting them to stick. The other thing that's really important is the brain is unbelievably active as a metabolic thing. It uses lots of sugar. So your sugar goes to your brain before it goes anywhere else in your body if you have a shortage of sugar or other nutrients. So your brain is very active. And as you know, when you exercise your muscles and it's like, God, I was sore the next day. And people say, well, that's lactate and it builds up in your muscles. And if you had massaged them, maybe they would go away and you wouldn't feel bad. Well, imagine that lactate pain being stuck in your brain. Now, it's not lactate, it's other kinds of things. But
Sure.
Basically, the brain during the day is accumulating stuff like the lactate in your muscles that it wants to get rid of. And when you get into deep sleep, not light sleep, not REM sleep, in deep sleep, that's when there is a massaging action in your brain which helps flush out some of those bad things. So again, if you don't get enough sleep, there's the belief that those toxic things build up in your brain. And that's why there's a relationship between not enough sleep and dementia, because you're really damaging the brain little by little by little. And I mentioned earlier the teaser question. We know exercise is important. We know sleep's important. But if you're given kind of the Hobson's choice, which do I do? To me, the answer is clear. Now, there hasn't been a randomized controlled trial, but if you understand what's going on, I think it makes sense. So when people say, Dr. Bobby, I got home late, I have a 6 o'clock gym appointment, what do? I'm only going to get 5 hours of sleep if I go to the gym. Should I reduce my sleep, get to the gym, or should I sleep longer, skip the gym? And my answer is sleep longer, skip the gym. And why do I say that? Because you can't make up lost sleep. So the belief that I'm working hard all week long, but on the weekend I sleep longer doesn't solve the problem. And why? Because those things that happen in your brain at night that we want to happen, if you're not giving the brain enough time to do them, they won't happen. You cannot make them up. You can work out longer at the gym the next day. You can fit in an extra workout if you want. You can't make up on the sleep. And so given the choice, please sleep and figure out the working out schedule a little bit later.
I like that. My follow-up to that is, okay, you can't make up for lost sleep, but I imagine all is not doomed for someone who's had even a month or 2 months of bad sleep, because at some point there has to be, I would assume, some type of reset. Is there a way to X number of days of good sleep, of getting that 8 hours of sleep of night? Like I'm thinking about that person who's hearing it and saying, oh, damn, I'm screwed. I assume that's not your message. I'd love to hear, like, is there a reset? Is there some time period? How do you think through getting back on a normal schedule?
It's a really great question. People say that if you were a smoker and you can stop smoking, 10 years later, your risk of lung cancer goes back to baseline. So even though you did that to your lungs repair and you'll be okay. I don't know that we know that about sleep. Look, the past is the past. If you didn't get a lot of sleep, great. Start today and work on your sleep and prioritize your sleep. I can't say my entire life is focused on sleep, but I pay very close attention to it. I go to bed every night at about 9:15 or 9:30. I plan our evenings around that. Now, does it mean I'm never out at 11 or 12 at night? Yeah, I do sometimes, but it's very rare. And if we have people come to the house, I have no problem saying, you guys can stay as long as you want, but I am going to sleep because I'm miserable the next day and I know the health harms that it does. It's a matter of just putting it front and center. And, I invite people to think about that and perhaps try it.
All right, Bobby, I think this has been a really great setup and gives people a sense of, okay, look, sleep is really important. It just is. And okay, that's all well and good, but Choosify is about taking action. What are some of the things that we can do positively to impact our sleep?
Well, the beauty of sleep is that although many of us have challenges with it, and even though I try to follow all of these, I will have nights where I don't sleep well. And I go back and say, well, why is that? Or what do I do about it? But there are very tangible things. And so I'm going to walk through 6 things you can add to your sleep approach. And then we'll talk about 6 things to avoid doing that might also help your sleep. Now, each of these has evidence to support them, where they actually did studies, or they took people who didn't do this and took people who did do this and asked the question scientifically, who did better? They all have evidence to support them. But before I go into any of these, you have to understand what clinical studies do. They take a bunch of people, they get, an approach A. Why don't you get exercise and we'll see if it improves your sleep? And then they'll have a group B that doesn't do the exercise and you see whose sleep gets better. Now, what you get in your published paper is the average. On average, we know that people who exercise get more sleep and do better, sleep better, have better quality of sleep. But that doesn't mean you are going to get the average. It might be more impactful for you or it might be irrelevant for you. And the only way to put the evidence to a test is what I talk about, which is N of 1 studies, where each of these things we're going to talk about, you can test them. You can do a baseline assessment of your sleep with your Oura Ring, Fitbit, Apple Watch, or just write down how many hours of sleep you've had and whether you felt rested in the next morning, whether you woke up a bunch at night. Try one of these 12 things, see if it makes it better. The beauty about sleep is you don't have to do it for a year. You should know within a week or so whether each of these things helps or not. And then you remeasure. So you are going to test for yourself because at some level, it doesn't really matter what the studies show. It's what matters and helps you.
Yeah, and I love that. I'd love for you to talk about N of one just really quickly for people who aren't altogether familiar with sample size and statistics and whatnot. This is really, you have to test for yourself. That's what you mean when you say N of one, right? Would you like to expand on that?
That's exactly right. Every study, this drug was tested for weight loss, Monjaro, and we had 1,000 people, and that's an N equals 1,000. And people are like, okay, that's good. That makes sense. But how can you do it for one person? Well, you are the most important person. And so ideally, what you do is you don't just say, let's try exercise, see if my sleep improves. You then stop that thing. Okay, I'm going to go back and not exercise. Ooh, my sleep got bad again. Oh, I restarted my exercise. My sleep got good again. So it's that repeated on off, which really reaffirms what works for you or what doesn't.
Is there, because again, choose a value is about taking action. I assume people want to document this in some way, right? If we're gonna do N of one, it's easy to think in your head that you're gonna remember, oh, I remember my sleep 6 nights ago. You're really not, I promise. I assume you have to document this in some way. How do you think about this? Let's say even with these 12 do's and don'ts.
Well, it's really important to document it because our recall is not ideal. So, yes, you're going to need to figure it out night by night how things went. Now, if you have an Oura Ring, which is what I have, or you have a Fitbit or even an Apple Watch or one of the other smartwatches, it will tell you in its interpretation how many hours of sleep you got, how much restful sleep you got, how much deep sleep, how much REM sleep, how many times you woke up at night. And although they're not perfect measurement devices, they're pretty darn good as a comparison. So maybe if you were in a sleep lab, you actually got 7 hours and it says you got 7.5 hours. But if you do something and now it goes up or it goes down, it really is a reasonable way to do it. Okay, so you don't have one of these things. Well, you could buy one if you want. I'm a nerd, I love them. But you can just do a simple questionnaire. There's something called the Pittsburgh Sleep Questionnaire. And it's a few questions. And it basically is how hard was it to get to sleep? Did you wake up in the middle of the night? Was it difficult to fall back asleep if you did wake up at night? How many hours of sleep did you get? How did you feel the next morning? Did you fall asleep the next afternoon? And you can just do it that way. And it takes, 3 minutes to answer these questions. So something should be done to measure a baseline, try your new thing, and then measure again.
Great. That's a good launching point. And it doesn't have to be high tech. Like you said, it can be that
Low
Pittsburgh.
tech.
Yeah, could be super easy. So open up a Google Sheet and have a row for each day and just jot down a note, right? I slept for X number of hours. This is how I felt when I woke up. This is how difficult or easy it was for me to go to sleep. Just whatever works for you, but just get it down on paper.
Exactly.
You need to have some sense of this.
Totally.
So, okay, Bobby, with that all as the preamble, let's get into, finally, this is my fault.
Let's get into the
it.
real stuff. Okay, so there are 6 things you can do to improve your sleep. First, and I'll try to do this as the day progresses. In the morning, when you get up, if you can expose your eyes to sunlight, that will help many people sleep. You have a circadian rhythm. In the morning, your body's ready to do certain things. At night, your body's ready to do other things. You want your body to know what time of day it is. That's why people who travel to Europe and have time zone changes, they have jet lag because their brain and their eyes are confused by what's going on. So if you can get out in the morning, get sunlight, not wear sunglasses so more sunlight comes in your eyes. Again, it's an eye thing. I don't think it matters sunlight on your arms. It's really in your eyes. Studies have shown it helps. And again, you'll do your N of 1 trial, you'll see.
So, Bobby, I have some questions about this. So you talk about you being a nerd. One of my secret nerd things is every city I go to, I track the sunrise and sunset. Okay, this is like some weird quirk in my brain. There's a website called timeanddate.com. So you just Google sunrise, sunset, London. And that's what I was just in London recently. And I always look for timeanddate.com, and it shows you for that day, it literally counts off like the altitude of the sun at that exact moment. And when it gets to about negative 7.0, that's when you see the first glimmer of light in the morning. Okay. So it's about between 30 and 35 minutes before technical sunrise. Then there is technical sunrise when the sun is at a sun altitude of 0. And then obviously it gets to its high point that day, which it also tells you. And then there's sunset. And again, you have to about negative 7 degrees after sunset, where you get another about 35 to 40 minutes of like dregs of light. So for the real geeks like me out there, when we're talking morning sunlight, so is there, okay, that first 35 minutes, does that still count? Does it have to be above the horizon? Can it be within 2 hours of sunrise? Because my concern sometimes is I lay in bed, I'm reading or I'm listening to podcasts. Like, did I miss it? Does it have to be within X degrees of the horizon? I know this is really in depth, Bobby, and you might like this might not be info you have off the top of your head, but I guess the heart of the question is it just like whenever you get up, go spend 5, 10, 15 minutes outside, or is it really make a concerted effort to get low angle sunlight?
I don't know if it's known, but I think what most people would say is, let's say you typically wake up at 7, you typically go to bed at 10 at night. And so that's 15 hours. You're awake for 15 hours. What we want is our brain to know the clock has started. 15 hours from now, I'm going to sleep. So I don't know that it has anything to do with how low the sun is in the horizon. It just means that you having the sunlight whenever it is that you get out of bed is saying to your brain, morning has happened. 15 hours from now, I'm going to bed. So you, my brain, need to be ready for that. Now, I would say you do not want to lounge around in bed for 3 hours and then at 11 go out and get your sun. I'm not sure it'll have the same benefit.
Gotcha. Okay. So this is truly to set your circadian clock. That's what I'm
Correct.
gleaning. Okay. Perfect. That is wonderful. So that's number one. Let's move on to 2.
Number 2, I already alluded to it. It's exercise. So exercise during the course of the day has been shown to improve sleep in people who have difficulties with sleep. Now, you might ask me, well, what type of exercise? Weightlifting exercise, running exercise. Oh, maybe it has to be swimming. It has to be 30 minutes. No, it has to be 40 minutes. I don't think anybody knows. All they've done are studies where they gave people an exercise regimen, and then they asked the question, did the insomnia get better? So exercise, whenever during the day you're able to do it, appears to be beneficial.
Right. So now a lot of people try directionally to exercise as often as they can. But also, many of us are hard on ourselves. And like you're saying, oh, does it have to be swimming? Does it have to be strength training? Okay, we don't know that, as you just alluded to. But what about, can someone to let themselves off the hook mentally? Can it be a walk? Can it be, hey, take a 15-minute walk? Or is it ultimately, Bobby, you don't know, I don't know, nobody knows, it's the N of 1?
I think that's right. For me, I want to do a twofer. I'm exercising because it'll help my sleep, and I'm exercising because it's going to help my heart. That kind of exercise can't be just a simple stroll in the park. You need to get your heart rate enough so it's a little bit challenging to talk. If it's easy to talk, or it's awful, can't get a word out, then you're either going too slow or too fast. So for me, I don't know what the evidence ultimately says about sleep. I'm going to try to do the exercise that's going to help my whole body. So that's what I would do. And the only caveat I would put here is, for some people, exercise right before bed is too energizing and they'll have a hard time falling asleep. Now, not that many people exercise at 9 at night, but just keep that in mind if it seems to be worse for you.
Okay, that's great. And that is all part of taking these quick notes. Just have a sense you need to track this, right? So, Bobby, total aside, and Let's also give a caveat that you are a medical doctor, but none of this is medical advice to anyone, to any specific person by any means. None of this episode. This is it's very important, but this is great info. You and I are just having a conversation about this, and people
Thanks
are
so much.
listening in.
Yeah.
Now, I'm curious, just in your own life, how many days a week roughly do you shoot for to get your heart rate above that? Hey, it's a little hard to talk level. Just anywhere above that, regardless of how far above that you go.
I get exercise almost every day of the week. I might take a day off just because it happens that way, not because of a purposeful choice, but I'm taking care of an exotic animal ranch. That's where we live. And so I'm always out and about doing stuff. I don't have my heart rate monitor on, but I'm sure even on days when I'm not working out, my heart rate may get up at some points during the day.
Okay, very cool. And that is the Madrone Springs Ranch for anybody who wants to check it out. It's a really cool website.
It's cool. We have a bed and breakfast, a wellness retreat. It's a lovely place. Take a look if you're interested.
Yeah. All right. Number 3.
This one I've actually gained a deeper understanding recently. So, from the literature, meditation has been shown to improve insomnia. And you might say, well, okay, your brain is moving a mile a minute and meditation will calm the brain. And that if you meditated, perhaps even close to bedtime, it might help you fall asleep. And for some folks, it really makes a difference. I do try to meditate most mornings, but I recently was hearing someone chat about sleep, and they made the really important point that what happens for many individuals is they fall asleep okay, but then a few hours later, they wake up. And once they're awake, now we don't know what woke them up. Maybe they had to pee. Maybe they had a bad dream. Who knows? But once they wake up, their brain goes into overdrive and they can't go back to sleep. And so when your brain goes into overdrive, you start worrying about things. The stock market's going down. I don't know what I'm doing. And I can't really save this much because we got all these new expenses for my children, whatever it is. It keeps you awake at night. And this person made the really important observation. Set aside a time during the day where, in essence, you journal all of the fears that you would otherwise think about in the middle of the night. Just get them out on paper. Use this as your time to worry. Now, is this related to meditation? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But for people who wake up and they do have this problem of rumination, perhaps take time during the day to try to get that out of you so that maybe you will sleep more comfortably and not tend to wake up and stay awake. So that's number 3.
I like that. I heard something similar to that. There was a cognitive behavioral therapist for insomnia on Dr. Peter Attia's podcast recently, and she mentioned something very similar to that. So it's interesting to have 2 different people mention that. And I guess my curiosity, because this is something that does afflict me to a large degree. So my sleep generally looks like, Bobby, I fall asleep really quite easily. I have no issue falling asleep. I'll stay asleep for what feels like or what I've been led to believe is a full sleep cycle of 3.5 plus or minus, but roughly 3.5 hours. And then almost invariably every night I'm waking up at that point. And sometimes I'll fall asleep instantly, but sometimes I'll just be up for a few hours. Now, one of the nice parts about Phi is not having to set an alarm clock for the next morning. I know I'm in a very fortunate position, but I don't stress out in the middle of the night like I used to. Because normally when you have that impending deadline of that alarm clock, every minute you're awake is lost sleep, right? Is literally, like you said, that sleep's not coming back. But for me, I can sleep essentially as long as I want to. So I don't stress about it. I just let sleep overtake me, and then I fall back asleep again, usually for somewhere also in that 3.5 hour range. I guess my actual question to you is, we're talking about getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Does it have to be straight? Or in my case, if I'm getting again, I'm a layperson, but I'm saying full sleep cycle. So let's not even adjudicate that. But if I get my 7 or 8 hours in those 2 different segments, is that okay?
I think if it's in chunks of multiple hours at a time, you should be fine. And one way to tell is if you did have an Oura Ring or one of those others, and it would tell you how many REM hours you had, how many deep sleep hours. What happens is if you take just little cat naps, you won't get into that deep sleep. So if you said, oh, and this is pretty rare, I get 7 1-hour blocks of sleep, probably was not going to help you. But if you get a couple of large blocks, I think you're just fine. And many, many people have exactly the experience that you do.
Okay. That's good to know. Yeah. I'm just, my role in this episode, I'm just trying to think of the questions that I know people like myself would be dying to ask you, because a lot of us do struggle with sleep and a lot of us stress because we know how important it is. And I think if we can lower that ambient stress, like in my case, I know there are many millions of people who are in that exact same situation. All right, if you don't stress about it, maybe it makes it easier the next night to fall back asleep. You never know.
Exactly.
So thank you for answering that. I really appreciate that. So, okay, we're up to number 4.
This is a really important one, and I suspect many people violate this one, and that is go to bed at the same time every night. Now, there's some argument about, is it more important to go to bed at the same time or wake up at the same time? Everybody's different. I know for me, I'm going to wake up at 5 in the morning, no matter what I do. Maybe it's 5:15, maybe it's 5:20. Very rarely is it 6 o'clock. So for me, if I don't go to bed by 9, I'm not going to get the right amount of sleep. If I go to bed at 10, I'm going to lose an hour. If I go to bed at 11, I'll probably lose 2 hours of sleep. This is for me the most important thing. If I can get to bed at 9, 9:15, 9:30 at the latest, I will generally get all the sleep that I need. This is very powerful for me. N of 1, I've done this a zillion times. Reproducibly, it works for me. It may not for others, but do give it a try.
All right, Bobby. So that makes sense. Go to bed roughly the same time. And now, just like anything, you don't have to be a zealot. It doesn't have to be 9:15. There's a plus or minus here. But I think essentially what Bobby's trying to say is, perfect world, you're not going to sleep at 9 one night, then midnight the next, and then 2 a.m. and back to 9. But again, life intervenes sometimes. So don't beat yourself up. That's another overriding theme from this is don't beat yourself up, but just try to be directionally accurate and try within a window of going to sleep at roughly the same time. You're training your body and your brain to think, all right, this is my time to sleep. That to me is a big takeaway.
And if you're going to do your N of 1 testing, and maybe for you, plus or minus an hour doesn't make a difference. If you go to bed an hour later, you sleep an hour later. That just doesn't work for me, but it may work for you. And that's the beauty of this. I can quote studies all day long, but it's whether it matters to you. So you'll test, you'll find out.
Yep, love it. All right, the 5th thing to do about it.
Okay, so 5 is expose yourself to heat before you go to bed.
Okay.
Sauna has been shown to do all sorts of wonderful benefits for your heart, for dementia, but it also has been shown to help sleep. This goes hand in hand with the 6th thing to do. Also, one of the critical things that Gail and I have been experimenting with, made a huge difference for us. Again, the literature supports this. A cool bedroom. What's the definition of cool? 70 or below, probably. Let me point out, having a 65-degree bedroom and 7 blankets on your bed is not going to be the same as having just a thin blanket and 65 or 70 degrees. So you do want to feel chilly, and that promotes sleep. So how does sauna and a chilly bedroom go hand in hand? Surprisingly, if you've taken saunas or you take a hot shower, your whole body, when you come out, is radiating heat. You're just like a giant barbecue briquette when you get out. But very quickly, you will dissipate heat and you'll start to feel chilly. What it does is dilates your blood vessels, and it ultimately causes you to have a lower body temperature. So the sauna is actually doing what the cool bedroom does, which is to get your body in a cooler place. Now, people say to me, oh my God, but I'm freezing to death. My feet are cold. My hands are cold. So there are studies that show if you wear socks to bed at night, it improves your sleep. So Gail and I have a cold bedroom and we wear socks to bed. Sometimes she wears gloves to bed, but we both often wear socks to bed. Again, you can test this. Socks on, I do better. Socks off, I don't do so well. Or it doesn't matter for you. So those two go hand in hand, but make a huge difference for some people, us included. So for us, the two critical of the do's is to go to bed at the same time and to have a cool bedroom.
Okay. Now, 70 degrees or below is what you said is just a rough back of the envelope. Naturally, there's, especially in Texas, I imagine there's some pretty wildly variable temperatures between December and, let's say, August, right? How do you think about, do you try, whether it's air conditioning or heat on in the house, do you try to keep it roughly the same temperature? So, for instance, in the winter, I usually set my heat to come back on at 61 degrees. So I let it get pretty darn cold. But then in the summer here in Richmond, Virginia, it gets really warm. So, I mean, the house during the day might be 78 degrees. I'm not going to cool it all the way down to 61. So I'll often cool it to, let's say, 68 or 69, something like that. Is that okay, if you will? Or should I be
Sure.
trying to get it roughly close?
No, I think that's great. So that's about what we do. Where ours is 70 during the summer months, and we'll have the heat kick on in the winter to get it up to maybe 67. So
Okay.
yeah, I don't look, if you're comfortable at 61, more power to you. For us, that's a bit too much.
Okay, fair enough. But yeah, so the big takeaway for everybody, just you want to be cool. You want to be cool. So, as counterintuitive as it might be, the hot shower will actually cool you down once you get out.
Correct.
And like
Exactly.
you said, keep a cool bedroom. So, all right, that's great. So, now those are the 6 do's. Now, I'm curious about the don'ts. That seems like the logical place to move on to here.
Yes. So there's 6 things to stop doing, which may help your sleep a lot. Again, you're going to test each one of these. First, caffeine. Some people, like myself, are extraordinarily sensitive to caffeine. If I were to have a regular cup of coffee at 7 in the morning, it will affect my sleep 14 hours later. Now, that's just because I'm very sensitive to caffeine. But for some people, they have a Diet Coke at 3 in the afternoon and they wonder why they're not falling asleep. So I would welcome you to try to limit your caffeine to the morning hours and see if it makes a difference. Again, if it makes no difference for you, enjoy your diet soda or your regular soda at 3 in the afternoon. But for me, very, very important.
Okay. So simple N of 1, just move
Totally.
around your caffeine intake and or reduce your caffeine
Yep.
intake and just play around
See
with
what
it.
happens.
Okay. Number 2.
Okay. The number 2 one is the one everybody hates: alcohol. Alcohol. I love alcohol. I enjoy whiskey. I enjoy wine. I enjoy beer, but it affects my sleep. It affects almost everyone's sleep. It might allow you to fall asleep quickly, but you'll often wake up a couple of hours later and you can't go back to sleep. So, alcohol not only affects, and we haven't really talked about this so much, we've been mostly talking about hours of sleep, but you want high quality sleep. You don't want to just be unconscious for 8 hours. You want your brain to go through the REM phases and the deep sleep phases, and alcohol messes that up. There's an interesting study where they had people drink earlier in the day and did a breathalyzer test like you do, before you get in a car. And these folks, breathalyzers were zero. So no apparent alcohol in their blood, but yet it affected their sleep.
Huh.
So it's just something to be aware of. I often say to people, if you want to enjoy something, maybe do it at lunchtime instead of dinner. Then you'll have more time to have it burn off and not affect your sleep. But again, you can test and figure out how sensitive you are.
Yeah, and this to me was one of the big takeaways from when I had that Aura ring. And that, just for everybody out there, it's Oura. That's what, when we're saying Aura, that's Oura. Yeah, Bobby, when I would have one drink, a glass of wine or a beer at dinner, I would notice my resting heart rate was up roughly about 10% overnight, just from one glass of alcohol. And that was shocking to me because, like you said, I mean, this is hours later. There's no way on a breathalyzer I would be at essentially zero. But the impact, and N of 1, of course, I'm not saying this is universal or is even a normal response, but I was shocked by this, absolutely shocked. And it's just, okay, that is having a significant impact on my body and brain that I could not have even foreseen. So it was just a wake up call, no pun intended, but it was quite interesting to me.
Yes, very important.
All right, let's do number 3.
Number 3, if you enjoy napping, don't do your naps later in the afternoon. If you're going to do a nap, do it at noon or 1 or 2. Try to have it a fairly brief nap, maybe like 30 minutes. People who have difficulties with sleeping may find that if they're napping until 4:30, maybe it's an hour and a half nap that they've had, can directly affect your desire to sleep. So the desire to sleep is complicated. There's a lot of different chemicals that cause it, but one of the main chemicals is called adenosine. And as it rises, like you're in an all-nighter situation, it builds up to such a high level that you're ready to collapse asleep. If you take a nap, some of that adenosine falls. So now the sleep pressure, what it's called, doesn't have a high enough level. So when it is time to go to sleep, you're not feeling particularly sleepy. So just beware. It might affect you. It does affect me. I try to do my napping earlier in the day. Nothing better for me than a long bike ride, run, workout, and coming back, climbing into bed and taking a nap. But I try to get it all done by 2 in the afternoon.
Okay. Now, we talked about meditation earlier, right? So as the third of the items to do, Dr. Andrew Huberman, who has a wildly popular podcast, the Huberman Lab, he talks about non-sleep deep rest, which is how he's rebranded the long-standing yoga nidra meditations. And he talks about this as a way, okay, if you're not napping, it can kind of take the place of a nap in some, I'm loosely and horribly paraphrasing, but again, he calls it non-sleep deep rest. So it's a way of rejuvenating. I'm curious, Bobby, if you have any thoughts, and I don't imagine that you have any studies at hand on this, but any thoughts on should you not do a meditation late in the afternoon or a yoga nidra because of that? Or is it really very dissimilar because of the adenosine that you mentioned from actual napping?
Dr. Huberman has a lot of really important stuff, and this is something he's been experimenting with in himself. I don't know how much there is in terms of real clinical trials. You're not falling deeply asleep in that, so I don't think it should affect in a negative way your ability to sleep later on. For me, I like to meditate. I like to sleep. I keep them separate. I don't do one to sort of kind of be like the other.
Yeah.
But it probably won't cause any problems.
Okay. And again, it's funny because the answer to my question is always it's an N of one ultimately, right?
That's right.
Which is the great part. So you test it out. And if you do know yoga nidra at 6 p.m. and you find, oh, wow, I can't fall asleep at 10 like I want to, maybe that did negatively impact me. Okay. Well, you just do it at 3 p.m. the next day, do it at noon the next day. Just figure it out. That's the beautiful part. So, Bobby, yeah, thanks for humoring me on all these questions. I think, there's so much information on this, and I know people have these questions. So this is really exceedingly helpful. All right, let's move on to the next of the 6 items that you should stop doing.
Don't eat late at night. So some people eat at 8 or 9 at night, and then they go to sleep. Certainly, if you live in Europe and perhaps Spain, you're eating really late at night, although their dinner is generally a light snack rather than the American dinner, which is the biggest part of our meals of the day. So ideally, you should perhaps eat 4 hours before you go to bed. So for me, I'm going to try to eat by 5:30 or 6, and then my stomach, my body, everything is ready to go to sleep later. Again, maybe important for you, maybe less important for you. Helpful for me, and the studies would suggest that's true.
Okay. All right. Don't eat late at night. Try to have at least a couple hour buffer, 2 to 4 hours from the last time you consume food. And Bobby, not for nothing, but also we talk about multiple benefits. A lot of people do snack and they don't realize how many extra calories that's adding to their diet, how much extra weight over a long period of time. I suspect there are significant add-on benefits of just instituting this as a rule.
Absolutely.
All right. Love it. So, all right. What's the 5th item to stop doing?
And you asked this question earlier, what's my wind down routine?
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of discussion about what should you do to get ready for bed. And for a period of time, my wife was wearing these blue light blocking glasses because that was the evil stuff coming from our computers and laptops and phones. Turns out that it probably has nothing to do with the blue light per se. It's that it's coming from an agitating device. So reading a boring book will put you to sleep. scrolling through social media or reading, things on your iPad or your laptop is going to wake you up, especially if it's social media and things that bother you. So it appears from the data that it's really you want to begin to minimize anything that agitates you. So put away your screens, put away your phone. Ideally, put your phone in the other room. Some people, put it on silent in case it's an emergency. For me, my wind down routine is I climb into bed, I pull out my Kindle, and I read for 15, 20 minutes, and then I'm very ready to go to sleep. So don't agitate yourself too much. Get rid of the screens, and that will help for a lot of people.
Okay. I like that. All right. What's the final item on your 6 items to stop doing?
Okay. So the 6th item may apply to many people or it may only apply to some of you. So there are many people, and they notice this as they get a little bit older. They have to get up at night to pee. And once they do, the whole thing falls apart. The ruminations begin. They have a hard time going back to sleep. Now, some people, it doesn't bother them too much. They get up at 2 a.m, they go and do their business, they go back to bed, they fall asleep. That's good. But if it starts a bad cycle for you, I think what folks should try to do is cut out fluids really early. I mean, I say to people, don't really drink anything after 5 or 6 p.m. I mean, I'm saying that based on going to bed at 9:30 or so. But give yourself hours of not drinking fluids. For anyone who is a swimmer, and I don't mean a major swimmer, when you are horizontal in the water, invariably you will come out of the pool and want to pee. It's inevitable. And it has to do with, how your blood pressure reacts to not being vertical. So when you go to sleep, naturally your body is going to produce a bunch of urine and it's going to wake you up in many cases. So if you don't drink too much, you have a little bit less likely for that to occur. And for some people, it makes a huge difference. Now, the corollary there is my wife invented this technique of if you wake up in the middle of the night and your body says, oh, I got to go pee. Tell your body it's wrong. You don't actually need to pee. And if you give yourself 2 or 3 minutes, you will fall back asleep in many cases. Look, if your body really, really needs to pee, you will wake back up again. You will not pee the bed in general. But that is another technique because once you get out of bed and vertical and walking down the hall, you may find it very hard to go to sleep. So those are 2 kind of hacks. The telling yourself you don't need to pee, there's no scientific evidence on this one. It's just something my wife invented. I've tried it, and many other people have tried it, and it really, really works.
I love that. No reason not to test that out. That's for darn sure. Okay, that's great. And for somebody who's sitting there saying, oh, I'm going to be dehydrated overnight, this is going to be a concern of mine. Obviously, this is not something that's plagued you or your wife or anybody that you've talked to about this. Any thoughts on that?
If you're concerned, wake up in the morning and have a nice glass or 2 of water and the problem will be solved.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think in the course of 6 or 8 hours, you're going to get so overly dehydrated that it's a problem. There is one last technique I will throw out there. Again, not evidence-based. And I don't remember who taught me this, but it's a really cool technique. If you wake up at night and your mind starts to race and you're having a hard time going back to sleep, people are like, oh, let's count sheep. Never quite understood the counting sheep thing, that's supposed to put you to sleep. But there's a variation on counting sleep, and it really, really works. So you think of a person's name. It could be any word, but let's say Tom. And you allow yourself to think of all the words you can think of that start with the letter T. And when you exhaust all the T words, you go to the O words. And when you exhaust the O words, you get to the M words. And invariably what happens is by thinking about two, twin, Toledo, your mind is breaking that cycle of rumination about the stock market and about the argument you had with your spouse. And once your mind is sort of going off in this blissful direction of thinking of T words, and you're thinking very gently, you're not trying to think hard, because as soon as you're out of the T words, you're on to the O words. It's amazing how quickly you go to sleep. You've broken the rumination cycle, which is really the problem you're trying to avoid. And that's probably where counting sheep got its origin.
Bobby, that is so interesting that you mentioned that, because I mentioned my friend earlier who I was talking to about sleep, and I sent her this article not 2 days ago, and the technique is called cognitive shuffling, and is literally exactly what you described. They call it a mental trick to help you quiet racing thoughts and fall asleep. So, for anybody who's looking for a little more info on that, it's called cognitive shuffling.
Yeah, I didn't invent this. I'm just testing it in my N of one, and it really is powerful. And we know many things to help people fall asleep. I would say the thing that's the hardest is people fall asleep fine, they wake up and they can't go back to bed. And so this technique, not drinking fluids, those kinds of things, doing the anxiety work during the day, this really can help people who wake up at 2 a.m. and they can't get back to sleep for hours.
Yeah, that is something that I am definitely personally going to put into my N of one experiment, because, like I said, this is something that plagues me. So, yeah, I'm very excited to try that out, which is
Well,
why.
the listeners should give you feedback, give me feedback. I
Yeah,
would love to know what works for you and what doesn't. And if you have some other ideas, by all means, send them my way. Now, we haven't talked about melatonin. We haven't talked about magnesium. Maybe that's for another day.
I like that. Now, for people to reach out to you, so obviously we've mentioned the podcast Live Long and Well with Dr. Bobby. It's fantastic. Where can people reach out to you personally? Do you have a website that has an email address or contact form?
I have a website called drbobbylivellongandwell.com. I think if you just put in Dr. Bobby Wellness Longevity, you'll find the website. It has articles on, a zillion different topics like this with references. You can leave a note for me. I do respond if it comes through that way. Sometimes with the podcast stuff, it sends me the note, but I can't respond. So that doesn't really help. I also have a health quiz that you might enjoy taking, which tells you what type health person you are. That can be very insightful. Send you a bunch of emails about it once you've done that, and it will give you some inklings into how you might approach health and what happens when health goes wrong and how you might likely respond. So that's fun for people too.
I love that. And that's right, drbobbylivelongandwell.com. And just for everybody, I'm also a stickler about spelling these things. It's Dr. DR. So you don't spell out the full word doctor. It's DR Bobby, Bobby, livelongandwell.com.
Beautiful.
Bobby, this has been absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate your time. And thanks for coming back on Choosify. And I know we have a lot of segments planned in the future. So this is touch point 2 of many, many to come. So thanks again for being a friend.
Oh, my great pleasure. Thank you for having me.